I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Brad Olsen. We've got some incredible guests upcoming for you. Tomorrow, Raw Cloud. Then Robert Ehringer, Odd Man Out, Dr. Lisa Couch, and L.A. Marzulli. Be sure and look out for those. Also, look out for my films. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku, Apple, and a few more. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime. I am booking guests for May. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Brad Olsen. He is an award-winning author, book publisher, and event producer. His keynote presentations and interviews continue to enlighten audiences at several events. Brad, welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on Forbidden Knowledge News. Always great talking with you.
Yeah, man, it's always great talking with you as well. Today, we're going to get into your latest book, Secrets of Antarctica, The Untold History of the Ice Continent. Last time you were on, you were still working on the book, but we talked a little bit about the evidence for a possible Nazi breakaway civilization in Antarctica, such as maps under the ice, tunnels that U-boats would utilize. Your book is available now, and you explore many fascinating possibilities surrounding the mysterious ice continent, which we're going to get much deeper into today. Before we do, for those that may not be familiar, remind the audience a little bit about yourself and let them know how they can find out more.
Sure. My name is Brad Olsen. I'm author of 11 books, this being the latest, Secrets of Antarctica, The Untold History of the Ice Continent. And I went down to Antarctica about 7 years ago on a 26-day sailboat expedition to the Palmer Peninsula in search of many of the mysteries that we've heard about this place, Chris, such as the 3 big motherships poking through the ice, to antediluvian civilization and pyramids, to anything paranormal or UFO related. And while I didn't directly get any answers to those questions, I did find out a whole lot more. All that is in the book. We'll probably discuss today on the show. And so just more about me. I've been to all 7 continents. I travel extensively, and I live out in northwestern Nevada, where I run C60 Publishing, which is my book publishing website, and also publish other authors such as Laura Eisenhower, Michael Jaco, Leo Lyons-Zagami, all people you've had on the show. And bradolsen.com is about projects that I'm involved with, and also my upcoming conference schedule.
I thought before we got into your book, I'd love to get your thoughts on current events. A lot has happened since we last spoke, which is usually the case these days. We have an explosion of information occurring right now. Very interesting reactions or lack of about the information. But as it relates to the Epstein files, what are your thoughts about what's actually come out of it? The lack of justice, the reaction from people. What do you think?
Yeah, isn't it crazy? We still haven't had a single arrest from all those thousands of emails that have been come out. And while you can't say that that's direct proof of crimes being committed, it's a pretty good indication that these people have been up to no good. So I like what the Iranian university professor says he calls it US being run by the Epstein class. And that's
Mm.
pretty much it, Chris. I think with this information, with the honey trap and Congress being blackmailed, they got us under their control. Even the Supreme Court justices went out to Epstein Island. Several of them did. So it's like every function of government has been compromised. So if anything good can come out of this is that the American public are going to see that it is one nation under blackmail and that we have been compromised in many ways by this little country, which we just started a war with,
Yeah.
which makes no darn sense to me at all.
That's another aspect of chipping away at Armageddon, this manufacturing of the end of days. This war with Iran seems to have those theological implications behind it. Hell, they even have the generals telling the soldiers that they're fighting a holy war, that they're doing this to bring about the end times and they're fighting for Jesus, which is absolutely nuts to me. Never thought I'd hear anything like this in my lifetime.
Yeah, in my esoteric series of books we've spoken about on the show a couple times, yeah, I get into the whole prophecy of Albert Pike and then others who even called for World War One, World War Two, World War Three, predicted them all way back around the time of the Civil War in America. So 19th century, they were already plotting out the generational timeline for when these other wars would start. And World War Three would be pitting Muslims versus Christians, and even the Jewish homeland would be destroyed, which we're seeing right now with the Iranian missiles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, yeah, do these people just want to self-fulfill their prophecy and just destroy the world and the Middle East in the process? I mean, how psychopathic do you have to be to go to those lengths? So right now, all I'm waiting for is the Dome of the Rock to be destroyed
Mm.
and the prophesized third temple to get constructed right there in Jerusalem. And then that would show you once and for all that this has been the plan all along.
Crazy times, man. Let's get into your book. How far back did you go when trying to understand the history of Antarctica? It seems like it'd be pretty difficult to dig up information such as pre-glacial maps, which you talk a little bit about. But how did you come across this information? How far back did you go?
Yeah, I'm a cartographer myself. I love to draw maps, study maps, and I include many maps in this book. And so when we're talking about going way back, the best map to reference, which I write about extensively in this book and then show several different versions, is the Piri-Reis map, which I'm sure you're familiar with from the year 1513. This was drawn. And in the liner notes on the side, Piri-Reis has written that this was drawn from other source maps that date all the way back to the Library of Alexandria and the time of Ptolemy, the Greek cartographer, 2,000 years ago. So we're obviously looking at earlier cartographers and earlier explorers who would have seen Antarctica many centuries before it was discovered. And what's so interesting about the Piri-Reis map is where Antarctica is also depicted on this map, including this island group, which, when probed under the ice, finds that it's there. Those islands are there. So this map was drawn with the perspective of Antarctica being free of ice.
Now,
So
this
the
Piri
map was made.
Reis, for those that aren't familiar, could you just tell us a little bit more about him?
Yeah, sure. He was a Turkish admiral and he was using different maps that he could get in the Mediterranean region to create his own map. It's drawn on antelope skin and was lost for many centuries, but then just rediscovered a few decades ago. And now it's on display at the Hagia Sophia complex in Istanbul. So he obviously was drawing from other older maps that show the Arctic region as well being free of ice. So what are we talking? 12,000, 14,000 year ago maps? Because it's well known that maps were often copied. They were the most important thing to, say, a pirate taking over a ship. First thing they would do is go right to the captain's quarters and break into his lockbox and steal his maps. And then they would copy them and give them to their allies. So this has been going on for many centuries. And so the Piri Reis map is just a collection of other maps that became that particular map.
Now, before we move away from the realm of maps, which other kinds of maps did you feature in the book?
Yeah, well, mostly the maps that dated in not just decades, but centuries before the uh, discovery of Antarctica. It's a whole chapter called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, largely paraphrasing Charles Hapgood, who wrote a book of the same name. And I'll just quote you here. Most of these maps that I also include in this book were of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea region, but maps of other areas survived. These included maps of the Americas and maps of the Arctic and Antarctic seas. It became clear that the ancient voyagers traveled from pole to pole. Unbelievable as it may appear, the evidence nevertheless indicates that some ancient people explored the coasts of Antarctica when its coasts were free of ice. It is clear, too, that they had instruments of navigation for accurately finding the longitudes of places that were as far superior to anything possessed by the people of ancient, medieval, or modern times until the second half of the 18th century. So we're clearly looking at lost technology, how to determine longitude, latitude, and go to these far-flung places many centuries before modern explorers made it down there.
Now, you focus a bit on the possibility of a Nazi breakaway civilization. If that is indeed the case, how do you think they came about the knowledge of what is down there? And what do you think the earliest information was that enticed them to go down there?
Yeah, and that's a whole chapter as well in the book, Nazis in Antarctica. And got to remember, leading up to World War II, Germany was not a colonial power in Europe. They were a continental power, but France had colonies around the world. Of course, British Empire, the sun never sets because there were colonies in every time zone. And even little countries like Holland had all of Indonesia as a colony, and Belgium had the Belgian Congo in the middle of Africa. Germany never did that. And so they've always needed to expand with their burgeoning population. And a large part of what World War I and World War II was about was expanding their boundaries in Europe. But of course, it didn't work out that way. But they saw the writing on the wall. Before World War II started, they started setting up a base and then a colony in Antarctica. Here's free land for the taking. You just have to get down there. And with all the geothermal features, you could set up shop underneath the ice because then you have a power source, you've got heat, and you've got the propensity to create these large under ice domes. And so that's where the first German colonies in Antarctica were set up in an area called New Schwabenland, which was claimed in 1938. And I have records of the Germans bringing down personnel and material all throughout the war years. Even after World War II, they were still supplying New Schwabenland. So it begs the big question, Chris, what were they doing down there? And what was so important with maintaining these bases or colonies in Antarctica?
Right. I'm sure the audience has heard all about the possibility of extremely advanced technology that the Nazis were developing. There's debate on how they got access to this information. Some believe it was channeling. Some think it could be even direct contact with extraterrestrials. As far as the technology that was theorized to be in Antarctica, do you think it was the technology itself that enticed them to go out there, or did they develop the technology after they were there?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Chris. And I have to address that in my book. That is, that the Germans were working on their own anti-gravity craft. In fact, many different variations of UFO craft. And they called them Vril, and then they became the Honeyboo. And they even developed a mothership called the Andromeda that could contain the smaller Vril and Honeyboo craft within it. So here you have the very first mothership, probably ever created by humans, as well as these craft that could even go outside of Earth. So I think if history were truly to tell the truth, the Germans were the first to the moon by decades, as well as landing on Mars and other locations in our solar system. So they had the technology, they've been backward engineering it for decades before the war in the 1930s. So they had the Black Forest UFO crash in 1933 that went to the German engineers, and even Mussolini had a craft, a nearly intact craft, come down in the Lombardy region in Italy. And he turned that over to the German engineers. And then you have the Vril women, and they were instrumental in getting telepathic communications that they were actually able to put pen to paper and start drafting engineering designs. So much so that the great German engineer Victor was Skollenberg, he looked at it and he said, "This is actionable intelligence. We can start creating our own craft." And of course, they did. And there's a lot of evidence that they were creating these craft, so much so that on the cover of the book, we depict the Battle of Antarctica, or the Battle of High Jump, against Admiral Byrd and the Armada in early 1947. So
Yeah.
I think that it's pretty clear that the Germans had developed their own form of UFOs, and that's largely what was seen not only in Europe during World War II. As some UFOs were seen in the Battle of Kursk, the big tank battle in the Soviet Union. But then, look, 1947, I'm not saying Roswell or any of the other UFO crashes in the US were, but right around that time, you've got the very first UFO sighting over Washington State. And in 1947 is when Operation High Jump went down. So a lot of these crafts are seen all over the place, including in South America. And I got to get close to a couple of these locations on my trip down there 7.5 years ago. And one of them was near this German enclave called La Falda in the hills above Cordoba, Argentina. And not far away from La Falda is this very famous mountain called Cerro Uraturco. And it was even written up in the Lonely Planet book that there were all these UFO sightings around there. So myself and Emily Infinity, we went and did a car camp, and we watched the mountain that night and didn't really see anything. But when I got back, I talked to David Hatcher Childress, and he said, "Brad, those weren't UFO aliens. Those were German craft that were coming out of a hidden base in Cerro Uraturco." And that's what the townsfolk had seen. So South America plays a big part in post-World War II as well, with these micronations and these other bases that were supported by what I think we can say was the Fourth Reich, that they reformulated themselves after the war and became more of an intelligence and financial power all crypto under the knowledge of most Western countries, or that they knew about them, but had to work with them in tandem.
It's such fascinating possibilities. I want to go back to Admiral Byrd and Project High Jump for a moment. There are a few researchers that try and recount the series of events and may be a little bit confused or may have a bit of bad information about how everything unfolded. I know there was an operation before Operation High Jump that Admiral Byrd was involved in that also he may have came across these non-humans as well. Is that right?
Well, that's what he writes about in his diary. And of course, there's a whole chapter on Admiral Byrd as well as Operation High Jump in the book. But in Byrd's diary, where he goes into a secret expedition and journey to a paradise inside the earth. This is the cover of his diary, which is still in print. Still pick it up on Amazon and elsewhere. And so I quote from it and basically paraphrase the entirety of the diary. It's not very long of a book, so it's easy to kind of tell you some of the highlights. And that is, he was the very first pilot to fly over the South Pole in 1929. And then he did another flight during the beginning of Operation High Jump at the end of 1946. And that was when there was absolutely known 3 hours of missing time. Uh, the people at Little America, the base he flew from, thought he was dead, thought they crashed. But it was 3 hours of missing time when he went into the giant hole in the ice near the South Pole, which he would have been the first modern explorer to see, because the two other land explorers, that is Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian, who got there in 1912, and then 35 days later, Robert Scott expedition of the UK, were the second to get there. But they came from a different angle. They came from a different area altogether. So they would not have gone out as far to see this hole in the ice. But Byrd did. And I have on here the map of his flight route. And you see the blow up there. When he gets to the pole, he goes out about another 150 miles out into the polar plateau area. You think, oh, you get to the pole, you do a fist bump, you say, hey, yeah, we made it, great. But here's Byrd going way out of his way to look at something. And I've been able to determine that this is the exact location where the no-fly zone is. Excuse me, and also where Brian S. reported the hole in the ice. So this is what's known today as the clean air sector. And you can see here the blow up of Antarctica. That's exactly where Byrd flew over this area, which is a no-fly zone today. It's even a no-go zone. You can't even go over it overland. And it turns out that this is exactly where Linda Moulton Howe's whistleblower, Brian S., puts the hole in the ice. So something is going on there. Byrd writes about it in his diary, flies in there, has 3 hours of missing time. While he's flying in, the first thing, they lose contact, radio contact with Little America. Then he loses control of his plane, but it's being remote controlled, guided. Then two UFOs come wingtip to wingtip, which he called flugel rods. And then they came over the his radio and said, hello, Admiral Byrd. You are in good hands. We'll be landing in the domain in a few minutes. And they leveled him down like a helicopter lands. No way that his plane could have landed that way. And out come these two really tall Germanic-speaking men who then escort him into this city, which Byrd called Buck Rogers like city, or I would say by his description, kind of reminding me of the Emerald City in The Wizard of Oz. And so
Hmm.
he goes in there and then he has a meeting with the master, who basically tells him, "We don't like you playing around with nuclear bombs on the surface. Go back to the Pentagon, tell your heads of state and leaders that you're not supposed to do that." At one point, the bird asks him, "Well, why did you want me to come here?" And the master says, "Well, you're very well known on the surface world." And Bird thinks to himself, doesn't vocalize it, thinks to himself, "Surface world, where am I?" And the master was telepathic and he picked up on that and he says, "Oh yes, you're down under the ice in the domain of the Ariani." So I mean, it just the story just gets more and more involved with who's down there, and then the Nazis perhaps setting up their own base in tandem.
It's extremely difficult to try and find real evidence for some of these things. We have bits and pieces, we have the letters. If they are authentic or not, it's still difficult to tell. As far as sources that you looked into for things like the German craft and some of the blueprints for that, what would you say are some of the best sources if the audience wanted to look into that themselves for some of this information?
Yeah, there was a big data dump in the early 1990s. A gentleman named Roger Edel was a German who was living in the UK. He was a journalist, and then all of a sudden, sorry, Ralph Ethel, he gets all these blueprints and just basically photographs and engineering documents that the Germans were backward engineering this stuff. And so a lot of this is so detailed and so elaborate that it would be
Hmm.
very difficult to hoax all this. Plus, Ralph Edel turned out to be past lie detector tests and was just somebody who got these documents, kind of like the way some of our Roswell documents would go to people and anonymously sent, and then they would report on it. And then people say, "Well, you're the one who's faking it." And they're like, "Wait a minute, I'm just reporting on it." So it does show that the Germans had a huge leap on the Allies and were very advanced with technology
Mm.
uh, long before World War II even began, but then certainly afterwards too, when they got a lot of that material and money and personnel out of Germany at the very end of the war. You know, many metric tons of gold went missing after World War II. So they had the ability to finance corporations and buy huge tracts of land down in South America, which John Lear and I have had conversations before he passed. He called them micronations. They're so big, they're like the size of some of our small states, but they're completely controlled by
Hmm.
Germans.
Yeah. What's some of the best evidence that you've come across that does point to Hitler surviving and the breakaway civilization going to South America? And possibly there's still remnants of that.
Still remnants of that, and as well as going to Antarctica. Well, there was the great series on the History Channel called Hunting Hitler that went for 3 seasons. They produced about 30 or 40 episodes. I saw a bunch of them and went to a bunch of the locations that they talked about. And their conclusion is very clear that Hitler did survive. The show even got the skull sample from the Russians who retained it since the end of World War II, did a DNA test on it, turned out to be a female. So conclusively was not Hitler himself. And then there are a whole bunch of eyewitness reports as well as photographs of Hitler surviving, that he lived until the early 1960s and was buried in a secret tomb underneath a very prominent hotel in Asachuan, Paraguay, where he remains to the day. But people, whistleblowers who were at the funeral, were there to report that he did indeed survive. And that's what they told me when I got to the Eden Hotel and I took a tour in La Falda, one of these German enclaves. And one of the tour guides speak English pretty well. And I asked him at the end, I said, you really think Hitler survived the war? He goes, well, I don't have to think it. I know it. I said, well, how do you know it? He goes, right here in town, there's an elderly woman in her 90s who is a chambermaid in the Eden Hotel. And she saw Hitler and Eva Braun, even their German Shepherd dog, Blondie, right after the war. And she's passed lie detector tests too. And has been on several history shows. So down in South America, Chris, they're pretty open with the idea that a lot of these Third Reich perp people survived the war, lived out their natural lives. Even extraterrestrials, they're far more open to the idea than most Americans are. And I found that really interesting that that they're cool with it. They're okay with it, and they know that Hitler. Here's a picture from our FBI, was mocking up what he might look like.
Yeah.
And sending that around. So they knew he survived the war. But by then, there were so many paperclip Nazis that had infiltrated not only the creation of the CIA, but the FBI and in high ranking positions in government that that they never went after him, that they just kind of worked alongside or just allowed them to exist. And now, I don't know if you caught it, but Stuart Swerdlow, who says he's one of the last remaining of the Montauk boys, he says he has a friend who grew up in the bases of Antarctica. And he said, we would love to come out and tell the world that we're here. We just don't know how the world is going to respond when we tell them that we're the Fourth Reich. Those are the words he used. Huh. So, yeah, how would we respond? Probably not too favorably for them.
That is very interesting, man. You mentioned extraterrestrials. You also have a chapter in your book about the possibility of extraterrestrial existence in Antarctica. Talk a little bit about some of the evidence you've come across.
Yeah, and that's really pretty profound if you think about it, how they've been able to work both below the ice, but also above the ice. And by they, I mean the Antarctic Germans. So this is a location at a seasonal base called Conan in the New Schwabenland region. And in 2013, they were doing some kind of major excavation here. And it does appear to be some kind of massive craft under the ice. There are other locations, and I do give the GPS coordinates for what look like UFO craft, sometime partially submerged in the ice. But then also the maps of the ancient Tibetans, who were then used by the German Ahenobarbate Society to chart out and map inner Earth. And so that too brings up a whole lot of very interesting possibilities that that the Earth is hollow. The Germans made their way in there. There they met or knew that there would be some extraterrestrials. Maybe even the master himself is a human-looking extraterrestrial. So it's just very intriguing that so much in the disclosure community coming out of Antarctica. And so on the back of my book, I say all roads lead to Antarctica. Of course, no roads lead there, but everything UFO and hollow Earth and antediluvian, all of those have a chapter that come out of Antarctica.
A while back, I had a guest that claims to be a former member of an Illuminati family. He was telling me a story about how high-ranking members of his family and himself would take trips to Antarctica. They would go into these underground bases where they would have 10 to 15-foot giants that were in stasis chambers. And this guy's job, supposedly, was to psychically communicate with the giants as they slept in the stasis chambers. Now, this is again one of those wild stories that we can't ever get any evidence for, but I find it very interesting that he mentioned they were giants in stasis chambers because I've heard this several times from other experiencers and researchers. And he said the giant told him that there would be a time in the future where they would awaken and rise from their chamber and make themselves known again. So that also relates to something you just said. But have you heard of anything like that? Giants in stasis chambers underground?
Actually, I have. It's
All
not
right.
it's not a crazy notion because other people report on it too. So that's really interesting. Another data point there. And I also report and write about the giants in Patagonia,
Hmm.
which in the book The Smoky God places their origin in inner Earth of an opening that come out in Antarctica, and then the closest place that they could go to is southern Patagonia. And then you find on all the early maps, they depict these giants as being twice the size of the Europeans.
Hmm.
So you have quite a bit of connecting data points here that there were giants in inner Earth and they could be in stasis chambers. I employed several remote viewers to look at some locations that I gave them where I thought would be the best possibility. I thought they would just come back and say they saw these under ice bases. And at this one location, all three of them came back and said that it was a cloning facility, that they were cloning and making not only, say, copies of prominent politicians
Huh.
or celebrities, but also doing chimera, mixing DNA and creating these freaky species. But they also mentioned stasis chambers that they would keep body parts in big vats. And I mean, it's just the weird science of what a cloning facility would look like. And I found it interesting that all three of them talked about the same thing. And then you brought it up with one of your guests that they went down and actually saw it too.
And you just mentioned clones. I also had a guest that proposed that it's because of German Nazi technology that we have the ability to clone right now. And it was most likely they were utilizing that and doing human cloning back in the time of World War II in the 40s.
Yeah, this should not come as much of a surprise to people that cloning technology is nearly 100 years old. I mean, we've heard that the aliens, that being the gray aliens, they're all test tube babies. They're all coming
Mm.
out of cloning facilities at, say, for example, Dulce, New Mexico, and other underground base locations, possibly Antarctica too. And so when you combine all this with, what was it, in the 1980s, we had Dolly the sheep that got cloned, and
Yeah.
that was in the above ground mass media. So you know they've got to have been working on humans for a lot longer than that, and certainly are very well advanced to this modern day.
While we're in the realms of exotic technology that may have come out of that regime, we talked a bit about UFOs. We just mentioned cloning. What other kinds of technology do you think originated from the Nazis?
Well, certainly, yeah, we could put cloning in that category. Uh, Zero point energy, UFO craft, but I do discuss this in the book too, that their submarine technology was way above anyone else, and
Hmm.
that they were using these submarines to penetrate deep into Antarctica, and they were very advanced. And if you think about it, a submarine would be very similar to a spaceship. It would be a pressurized environment. It would be pretty cramped quarters, and the people that were specialized in being sailors on those could also double in the secret space program. So here's the schematics of some of their very advanced submarines. And they're very large too. They're kind of like they could move huge cargo around in them. Here's a picture of one of them that survived and is now a museum in Germany. And it's ginormous. I mean, it's the size of our space shuttle. So they could move a lot of the honeyboo and vril craft down there or to their bases in South America and continue working on those operations. So I think a lot of the technology that came out of the UFO research, the honeyboo and the vril and the Andromeda craft, paralleled the technology in the submarine technology. And at the end of the war, they were so advanced, they could drop a submarine out of the docks in Hamburg, Germany, goes underwater in the North Sea. It doesn't leave a single air bubble. They worked that out, and they never needed to come up for air or to look around even once. They could make the
Wow.
whole trip to Antarctica in one fell swoop. So they're virtually undetectable as well. And so that's how they got a lot of the materiel, personnel, and captured loot out of Europe and brought it to South America and Antarctica.
You think it's likely that there are still individuals and groups that were members of this breakaway civilization, like you said, the Fourth Reich, that are still in operation? They're still developing technology. Do you think that they're still around?
Yeah, multi-generational. They don't like the term Nazi anymore. It's too charged. They
Huh.
prefer to be known as the Antarctica Germans. And there are more data points about their existence as well. For example, on Carrie Cassidy's channel Project Camelot on her website, she has a book called The New Berlin Base, written in German, that was submitted anonymously, but there's a person's name on it. It's probably his pen name. They translated in German, and it's a whole bunch of really like obscure calculations and physics. If you're good with that, you might get some out of it. But the book begins about this guy's life growing up under the ice in Antarctica and just like
Oh,
endless domes, and finally makes his way out to the surface and pops out in Asia, I think, and makes his way back to Germany, and that's where he writes the book. And then 2.5 years ago, in the middle of winter down there, both Michael Sala and Linda Moulton Howe reported on how this contingent of German speaking, mostly men, just show up at McMurdo in the middle of winter when there's so very few people down there. There's only about a
hmm.
thousand people on the entire continent. And they show up in
Interesting.
one of these snowcats. So they traveled over the ice
Huh.
to get to McMurdo, and they just said, please get us on the first flight out of here. We
Huh.
want to go.
Wow. That
So
is
there
so
are data
interesting.
points that there are multi-generational Antarctic Germans that still live down there.
You have a chapter on the black goo. Let's get into
Ah,
this. I've heard so many different theories and possibilities about the origins, what this is, what its function is, the dangers. Talk a little bit about what you focus on black goo.
yeah. So this one was largely from the speakers who have been at the Bases Project in the UK, run by Miles Johnston, and I spoke there in December. He flew me out and did my presentation on Secrets of Antarctica, and several other speakers that he's had on, from Harold Kotzvela to David
Yeah.
Griffin. They spoke about the black goo being extracted by the British Navy from this tiny little island that's halfway between the Falklands and Antarctica called South Thule Island. And these guys were saying, this is what it is. I mean, it's perpetually frozen island, but it's interesting on Google Earth, they block out certain parts they don't want you to see.
Huh.
It. This is the peninsula where the base is. And this is what the whole Falkland Wars in 1982 was fought about. A lot of people, even military historians, don't realize that the British split into two groups. One went to fight in the Falklands, and then the other one went to the South Sandwich Islands, where the war was actually surrendered off of South Thule Island. That was the last location the British need to capture, where they were working on this black goo that was stored in a perpetually frozen environment. So when
Hmm.
it's frozen, it cannot become active. And what is it? Well, it's like this intelligent, sentient formula or a life form that that you'd look at it and say maybe that's just oil or something, but when you put your finger close to it, it wants to join with you. It wants to become part of you. And so the British were tipped off that this could really enhance their super soldiers. So the whole Falkland Wars was fought over getting the black goo from South Thule Island from a group of Argentinian researchers that just put up a white flag and surrendered. Not a shot was fired, but this was called Operation Keyhole. And it was the secret war within the cover story of the Falkland Wars to go and get this black goo. So then they go and get it, and they put it in these special containers that Miles Johnson's whistleblower was talking about, somebody who was in the Royal Navy that witnessed it. And when they got up close to the equator, it started to activate, started to wake up, come out of the deep freeze. And then they got it to the UK, and they allowed it to be backward engineered by Marconi Laboratories in the UK. And it got out of control, and dozens of researchers either died mysteriously or committed suicide. I mean, there's a whole string of weird
Hmm.
deaths related to it. But it was all to understand what it was and then give little bits of it to their super soldier program. So while I was out on the bases program, we had Penny Bradley and Drago Reed, who both were have memories of being on the German Nachtwaffen, the Dark Fleet secret space program, and both of them have memories of ingesting this black goo, and it would give you all kinds of superhuman qualities, and it would also give your stamina a big boost. So then you could withstand those pressurized environments and go into outer space, and it wouldn't be so painful or difficult to operate in a spacesuit, for example, or down in Antarctica in extreme cold. So there's something about when it joins with the human body or even in animals, it gives them an enhancement because it kind of takes over certain properties in the body and gives them different abilities.
Hmm.
I mean, this is about as weird as it gets, Chris.
Yeah, man. Depending on who you're talking to about black goo, they will tell you different properties that it may have. Some believe it is a completely malevolent substance. There's some that'll tell you it's programmable. It depends on what it's exposed to. But I'm sure if our government and three-letter agencies got their hands on any kind of substance that is similar to that, the usage for it would not be beneficial, I imagine, at least for the rest of humanity.
No, exactly. And yeah, I think it was probably best to be left frozen on South Thule Island because now it appears that the black goo has been weaponized and also released upon the general population in the form of chemtrail dispersion.
Really?
And you've heard of graphene oxide that was in
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So that's a form of black goo and the
Ah,
ferrofluids. So they're these sentient type of microscopic or nanoparticles that can self-assemble in the body and become something entirely different and start to take over and even kill the host after a while. So
wow.
it's very dangerous substance, but unfortunately, I think this is what the Morgellons syndrome
Yeah.
is all about, and other very strange ailments that have befallen the human race because they've been exposed to this stuff.
I've heard some say that there are protocols to expel this substance from your body. There are certain things that you can do. Have you heard of this?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's the zeolite, and it's a form of heavy metal. It's graphene oxide, so it can be attracted with a magnet type substance like zeolite or the masterpiece, and can be extracted and then just released from the body through the regular systems of releasing. But I think yeah, it's a probably good idea for everybody to be on some kind of detox protocol at this point, because we're getting hit by this stuff in so many different ways. I mean, they're putting it in our food, our water, our drinks. It's even been found that some of these fibers have been found in clothing. And so
Hmm.
when you're exposed to this stuff, it gets into your system and then self-assembles, and then it
Jeez.
starts taking a life of its own. So we all need to start being proactive in getting at least the heavy metals out of our body. But while you're at it, go ahead and get the parasites and the other stuff out too.
Now, I know at one point you were possibly pondering taking another trip out to Antarctica. Has this been developing at all?
Yeah, so I had a venture capital company guy come up to me and said, we'd like to get behind this and put out a deck and start to attract investors. It's called VC Cross, and it's still out there. We missed this season, of course, but next season starts in November. So I guess we could put the call out there that I'd still like to go down there with the film crew. I know the locations I want to film at, and at the very least, it would make a very compelling documentary, if not multi-part series, um, picked up by Netflix or Amazon streaming. I think it would be really amazing to go down to a lot of these locations, like, for example, the pyramids,
Yeah.
and just put it to rest once and for all.
Hmm.
Are these things none attacks that are just attractive mountains poking through the ice, or is there something behind it? Could they possibly be created by intelligent hand? And in the book, I show several locations of pyramids with the GPS coordinates. So I just want people to look at them and make up their own mind. But they're very symmetrical. They're about the size or even larger than the pyramids in Egypt. And to me, the jury is still out. We need to go down there and investigate, find out if they are just natural mountain formations shaped like a pyramid, or if they were built with intelligent hand. I mean, this is a complete game changer. This
Hmm.
would show that there was Atlantis or other high civilizations on this planet a long time ago. So imagine that's why they don't want this information getting out there.
Last few minutes we have. What are your thoughts on the state of disclosure? There's no doubt that they are going to continue to trickle out this information. What are your thoughts on where we're at right now? The information that's come about, the congressional hearings, it seems to be thrown out and then reeled back, but every time it's thrown out, we get some pretty profound information. The reaction from the public has been interesting. I don't think full disclosure would cause mass chaos like many believe it would, but what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, up until the second Trump presidency, disclosure has been a very slow drip, 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 little information here, little information there. Now, last month or in February, Trump came out with a Truth Social tweet where he says, I'm ordering all the military to give up their information on UFOs, UAPs,
Yeah.
extraterrestrials visiting Earth. I mean, no president's even gotten close to making a statement such as this. So there's clearly something behind all this. It's not just, oh, I'm taking a stab at the dark. No, they
Hmm.
know something. But here's the thing, Chris. Look at how the Epstein files were just glossed over with the whole news narrative on the Iran war. You don't hear much about Epstein anymore, do you?
Right.
And
No,
now that the
unfortunately.
Iran war isn't going so well, I think the next narrative would be to roll out the aliens. And Stephen Greer and uh, John DeSantis and John D'Souza, former FBI agent, they've been warning, look out for Project Bluebeam. This is not off the table, that this could be the fake alien invasion that Werner von Braun talked about 50 years ago. Greer says he's seen documents all the way back to the 1950s. They were talking about using aliens, UFO as a possibility for moving into a new world order, is what Greer says is the reason for it.
Mm.
And what better way to change the narrative very quickly after this war has just been such a catastrophe to move into UFOs, and everybody will talk about that.
How do you think the masses would react to full disclosure? There are several high level individuals that are extremely concerned about the reaction. They believe that there may be theological implications. There's also the select group within the government that believe that aliens are demons. So there's some interesting perspectives that are floating around with everything. What are your thoughts on the possible reactions to full disclosure?
Right, yeah, and JD Vance just recently did
Yeah.
an interview where he called gray aliens or other ETs demons. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how it's got these parallels with Christianity and some of the words that we've used. The devil could be reptilians, the demons could be gray aliens. I mean, there's all these parallels, and then the apocalypse. And the other part
Yeah.
of Project Bluebeam is that they're going to put the Messiah up in the sky, right? That we're
Yeah.
all going to see Jesus in Western culture, or Mohammed in Arab countries, or Shiva in India, or the Buddha out in Asian countries, that we would all see those religious figures up in the sky, and even using voice to skull technology. But like everybody said about Project Bluebeam, it's going to be a farce. It's not the way aliens would make contact. And it's just humans tricking humans to get us to give up our rights and go along with, say, a new world order agenda. So
Yeah,
I'm
man.
very dubious about these official proclamations of disclosure. I think there's always going to be some kind of agenda behind it.
Yeah. Well, I do know one thing, that reality has become stranger than fiction,
Sure.
and I'm enjoying the show so far. Do you have anything upcoming that you'd like to let the audience know about? Anywhere they can go check you out?
Oh yeah, I'm going to the New Living Expo in San Rafael. Be there in 2 weekends from now, in middle of April, and then I've got Rise of the Guardians in Sedona. Then I gotta quickly get back and catch a flight to Germany, where I'm giving my new Secrets of Antarctica talk to a
Yeah.
all-speaking German population. That'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah.
And then I'll be at Contact in the Desert this year. And then I'm flying out to Bosnia for the Bosnian Pyramid Conference, summer solstice in June. So busy schedule coming up, but it's what I love to do, and hope to see some of your listeners and you at one of these conferences one of these days again, Chris.
Yeah, man. I'll definitely have to do it. I miss going out to those. Those are so much fun. Brad, thank you so much. Before I let you go, remind the audience how they can get a hold of all your stuff.
Yeah, and then the best place to get a signed copy or any of my books, as well as some of the other authors that we publish, is cccpublishing.com, and then bradolson.com for my conference schedule.
Excellent. Brad, thank you so much. We'll definitely be doing this again. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. See y'all then. Hello, friends. I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators. allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners, of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, and Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order. Watch Doors of Perception now on Amazon Prime. We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Cory Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history.